You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Hello. So I thought what I would do today is to give a sort of basic introduction to the red pill phenomenon, what it does to one's brain, and how one sees the world. The red pill, as I'm sure many are aware, comes from the Matrix, the pill that Neo takes that allows him to see the world with his own eyes, and that what he was living in was a simulation, a particularly sophisticated piece of coding. It's not real. In our world, this piece of coding is called politics, or the uniparty, and shrouding it is this mythical good called democracy. It's presented to you to give you the illusion of choice, a sense of power. Because government is not limited like it was in prior ages, restricted to those of royal blood, government has shifted from private to public, democracy being the instrument that powers this illusion of choice. Democracy advances the idea that anyone in the public sphere has access to the political apparatus. That's the theory. In practice, however, all this does is open the floodgates for the wealthiest members of society to flush the government with exorbitant amounts of cash and purchase the government apparatus to further their own ends. One will notice all sorts of industries lavish their chosen candidates with grotesque amounts of money to get them on the ballot, and then the public votes for them. This is farcically called power of the people. Voting is but the means to an end. The seedy nature of this process has been perverted before the ballot has even been cast. The idea that any politician will be held accountable to their constituents, when in reality it's not the votes that got them into power, is just a laughable absurdity. Democracy is the guaranteed corruption of government. It's a fictitious dream. It will inevitably birth an oligarchy, the rule of the few. And suddenly the push to save democracy all around the world starts to make a hell of a lot more sense now, doesn't it? By the way, if you want a particularly spurgy reaction, try asking any of those people how US foreign policy is not neocolonialism, the liberal world order, anyone. But anyway, I digress. Let's dive a little deeper into this, shall we? And we'll use the Americans as a model. Their government has two sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. This is the faces of their politics, but in reality this is nothing but window dressing, for there is but only one party, the uniparty, otherwise known as the establishment. And the establishment does in fact not have any political alignment at all, because both parties worship the same god, money. And money does not have a political alignment either. It will gravitate towards whichever party best satisfies their wants and desires. Money in politics is an investment in this regard at the expense of the voters. And so how does the uniparty stay in power? Simple, through fear and propaganda, the classic tactic of divide and conquer. See, the uniparty greatly fears the unity of the masses under one banner, and so it must divide them, which is done by the promulgation of the leftist worldview, one which constantly funnels more and more power and trust out of the hands of individuals and organizations not connected to the government, and instead funnels the power and trust into the government and its organizations. The progressive worldview, the vision of the anointed. And this is done through an indoctrination process via state education from as young as the machine can get access to humans. Why through education, you ask? Because this is the time where the machine can access early humans away from the guardian class, their parents. The machine does not want parents to question the seeds they're implanting into the young'uns' minds. They don't want children to grow up to question things. They don't want children to be inquisitive or to think critically. They don't want people to foster relationships, create families, and be self-sufficient. No, they want humans to be miserable, isolated, and alone, away from any organs of learning or safety that is not connected to government, because the state seeks to foster obedience to and dependency on the government, because this is how the state gets control and power. And so from the ground up, through the years, culminating in the mecca of propaganda, the universities, or as I like to call them, the crank factories, and the ideas of the insane maniacs that roam those halls have permeated every aspect of Western civilization, from education to media to entertainment to business to state institutions. It is an all-out assault on every aspect of reality. And because people do not interface with all of these things, the propaganda must be constant and come from every angle. Propaganda must be total. So the fear and propaganda work hand in hand. On the one hand, we've got the corruption of the institutions who work on behalf of the state, while those same institutions scare the bollocks out of people by pumping society full of fear porn and telling them the answer to every ill in the world must be solved by government. For example, telling society the world is going to end because of climate change or some stupid shit, even though the most basic of preliminary searches will reveal the so-called expert class has never made any factually accurate assessment or true prediction when it comes to the environment in over 60 bloody years. It is yet another lie and a total scam, much like the coof. All the stuff these dim-witted experts are saying is now fine to do, or damn near everything they've been advocating for, which has induced a catastrophic amount of irreparable damage, anyone with sense who said this is a total crock of illogical shit was demonized despite the overwhelming amount of evidence that was leaking through the ever-weakening grip of censorship we were all living under. The main difference between the left and the right is those who are enslaved and worship the state as if their very lives depended on it, versus those who detest it and see it as an evil. To put it simply, those who are risk-averse versus pro-risk. Those who believe in the collective will as dictated to them by the state versus those who would rather flip the state the middle finger and believe in the anarchic power of the individual. Now, I've been trying to figure out why so many leftists appear to be, well, I'm trying not to be overtly partisan here, but incredibly fucking stupid. And I mean this from a simple ignorance perspective, a lack of intellectual development kind of mindset. Because many people will either not understand much of this or will burst forth with this Neanderthal-like rage. There's a much more aggressive reaction than the vomiting Neo you see in the Matrix. Now, from what I can tell, and I've said this many times before, humans are set to if it ain't broke, don't fix it by default, and the Red Pill is in many ways a diagnostics tool. Much like the scene where Morpheus walks Neo through the Matrix and explains many are so hopelessly enslaved to the machine they will actually defend it. This is true of many people, those who've been drenched in the propaganda for so long they can't understand any of this stuff, or will flat out refuse to listen. Understandable, it is a tough pill to swallow, and it is difficult to explain to someone something is wrong when they themselves can't see there is a problem. So in order for the discussion around the Red Pill to be fruitful, you need to find a human mind that is, if not willing to take the Red Pill, so to speak, is at least curious as to why something appears to be wrong. And when it comes to the Red Pill, there are two types. There's the genuine Red Pill versus the fake Red Pill, which is a blue pill soaked in red. In my opinion, the difference between the genuine Red Pill versus the fake Red Pill is a genuine Red Piller is a destroyer. The fake Red Pillar is a reformer. A genuine Red Pill person must move to the right. I've said this before in my monarchy videos. You will have those that look at the current system and see the design is flawed, and so they want to scrap the entire system altogether. Then you have those who think the design isn't the problem, it's merely the components. However, they refuse to acknowledge they don't own any of the factories that produce those components, nor do they have any bloody plans on how to obtain ownership of them either, so Lord knows how the hell their minds work at all. These would be the fake pill, your so-called red-pilled leftists, who think government can and should work, but who haven't the faintest clue of the incentive structures around the monopoly of public government. They're simply delusional. These people would do well in reading some of Alexander Hamilton's views about government. I think his perspective might surprise them. I was watching the Modern Wisdom podcast, and Chris had on this guy, Balichi Saranivasan, and he brought up this interesting concept that I'm now going to shamelessly rip off, which is one's linguistic diet. The news is saturated with what you could call verbal sugar bumps that are sprinkled liberally into the news writing to sort of jolt the reader, a sort of semantic overload that provokes disproportional emotional reactions. But much like real sugar, it's only empty calories, it's not nutritious information. So if this constitutes a substantial portion of your information consumption, your brain is going to rot to hell. Now, in order for the leftist worldview to function, it has to maintain this very divisive hatred of the other. Envy is the fuel that powers this machine. If you follow the leftist news sources, you will notice this is straight out of the Rules for Radicals playbook. Constantly accuse others of which you yourself are guilty of, otherwise known as projection. Now, considering the leftists can't think, so won't think, and have no capacity to think, whilst also maintaining this hatred of the other, they're being conditioned into this belief that those who oppose them are straight up evil. So not only will they refuse to listen and learn from the other side, they will also refuse to engage in any kind of civilized dialogue. You can imagine this sort of visceral divisiveness is probably not particularly conducive to fostering a healthy society. This is also why the left appears to be completely insane. If you've been propagandized for this many years on end, and you've been told those who oppose you pose an existential threat to your existence, it's very easy to be turned into a wielder of great evil and engage in all sorts of wicked action provided your masters tell you that this is all morally justifiable for the greater good, a hellish version of fight fire with fire. It's also why anyone who has two brain cells to rub together looks at these lemming-like muppets who scream fascism while being overtly fascist themselves, sees their complete lack of any kind of self-awareness as, while amusing, also quite jarring. So when you take the red pill, it's a sort of firmware update for your brain, and you'll be able to notice the sugar lumps and begin to sour on them. Phrases like Nazi, fascist, authoritarian. Hell, at this point you can probably make the case even Trump's name can make that list. At least in the leftist circles anyway. Or the increasingly ominous phrase, our democracy, which is Dem speak for Democrat rule only. You'll start to notice the repetitious patterns and quickly recognize the left's diet is absolutely loaded with them. And then it will hit you why the left are so dense. Read any left-leaning news piece over the last 5 years, the rhetoric and the propaganda is always exactly the same damn thing. They're not learning anything new, they're stuck in stagnation, subsisting on this heavy sugar lump diet. They're voluntarily trapped in this sort of perpetual feedback loop. They're essentially drug addicts. And so the red pill's interjection in this perpetuating process is the disruption of this feedback loop. It's trying to cut off the drug supply. So in this interjection, the red pill is essentially rehab. And anyone who knows addiction knows addicts don't give up being dragged kicking and screaming. They must give up voluntarily. And that is all for today, and I will see you all next time.